Okay, I think we can start. We'll call to order the Tuesday, June 19th, 2012 meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. We have four commissioners here today. Commissioner Gail Cameron is attending a compulsive gambling session that she'll report back on next week. We are streaming live again, as we now do all of our meetings, so welcome to our audience online, whoever you are. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes, June 5th. I think we reviewed those last week, but hadn't had enough notice, so do we have a motion to adopt the June 5 minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it. June 12th. Can we move on those as well?
Sure, yeah, I posted those this morning, circulated them, not posted them, I circulated them this morning, so
Okay,
they're in order, if everybody's had a chance to read them.
okay. Did everybody have a chance to read those minutes?
Yes, I did.
Do we have a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
They looked great to me, so all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Okay, administration, any update on the search? Where are we in the process, the executive
Yep,
director
the executive search firm, we received 4 responses since our last meeting. The solicitation period came to a conclusion, or closed rather, not concluded, closed. 4 responses were received. 2 of those 4 responses were the people who also submitted originally, so that's good news in my book. But 2 additional ones as well. Brandon has conducted what I call the phase 1 review for the adherence to all the requirements, all the administrative requirements, and all firms have passed that review. So I will move forward with the evaluation of the technical proposal in the next, really in the next couple of days.
So are you going to make a recommendation to the commission as to which one to adopt?
Yes,
So
after the period of evaluating them,
Right.
yes.
So by next week, we would be able to do that?
That's a worthy goal. I don't know how attainable. The one thing that and we say in the RFR, we may request an interview
Right.
with 2 or more of the respondents. That's exactly what it says. So I want to go through the responses, figure out whether we will be inviting 2 or more, and then report back.
Okay. But you don't think you'd have those interviews before the end of before the next meeting?
Before the next meeting, it'd be a little tight,
Yeah,
but we could certainly try to, assuming that we're only going with, whether we're going with 2 or more, we could probably try to get in 1 or 2 or, to schedule those meetings.
Okay. Yeah, well, if it's possible, that would be great to do, and everybody's anxious to get moving on this, but I know you got to get the process right, so.
Yep.
Okay, and additional hires, we have these several people in the pipeline. I tried to reach Commissioner Cameron, but wasn't able to see what the background, do you know what the background check status is on?
2 I know the 2 are underway, it should be completed by the end of this week. So
Yeah,
it's
okay.
a couple of days.
Okay, and Commissioner Cameron was working on the fingerprinting arrangements with the state police, and I don't know whether those have gotten worked out or
I
not.
don't think that's resolved yet, and
Okay.
I'm about to do the contract for the drug testing this week.
Okay. So we'll check with Commissioner Cameron on how that's going. And additional hires, the only other topic we'll get to from the consultant report. Discussion of commission internal policies. Do we have any other particular reports to discuss or issues to discuss?
Same as last week, I have continued to make progress drafting all chapters. Now I have drafted all chapters in what I see to be the employee manual. I forwarded to Commissioner McHugh for a second level of review, and we can update from that, or,
Yeah, I have 4 chapters that are in my slot to review now. And Commissioner Zuniga's distributed 2 other chapters to 2 other people, so there's
Yes.
6 total.
That's right.
I am going to make it a priority to finish those this week, and I would hope that we could bring the whole manual back for a vote next week.
Wow.
Um,
Great.
Does that
Yep,
seem
that
doable
sounds
to you?
doable, yeah.
And then we've got that in place, and it'll be there for all the hires that we're gonna make.
Great.
Until we need to make some revisions further down the line if necessary. But I would really like to wrap that up by next week.
Okay. And did you have the demonstration on Friday of the project management?
Yes.
Folks, how did that go? Where does that stand? Because I wasn't there on.
yeah. I was there, Commissioner McHugh was there, and one of the takeaways is that this particular tool would be very helpful on in an environment where multiple people are thinking or brainstorming about it. In my mind, that fits this commission. If there's a way in which we could come to a meeting, discuss the scenarios that would be contemplated, that's a positive. Now, that's not the only feature, but that's an important one that I took away. It could also, it's a very interactive and easy to use tool, and that's one of the benefits.
So where are we on proceeding with getting either, we were talked about getting either, your various levels of either person or firm or big firm or small firm or?
Yeah. Well, we, pulling the trigger, I guess, would be the next thing.
Okay.
I am of the opinion that the alternative that we did discuss a couple of meetings ago of bringing someone in, we might not be ready for that. Somebody who's essentially going to manage a tool like that. I mean, I know there's reasons to bring someone in, perhaps, but I think that first deciding on the mechanism and the tool was
When
one
you
of the
say bring someone in,
conclusions.
you mean bring a full-time person in?
A full-time person, yeah.
But you would, I think we're leaning towards having a firm, somebody that could train us and get the initial project management chart built
Yep.
and train one or more people here and so forth,
Yep.
and then probably phase into a person over time.
Yep.
Is that still what you're?
That's still, yes. And we would have to conduct a procurement,
Yeah.
would be my recommendation. I don't envision these to be a large procurement, but one in which a full-fledged RFR would have to be issued. I think that given the scope of work and time, it could be done by simply soliciting 3 quotes
Right.
from appropriate vendors. So I could go ahead and solicit those 3 quotes to have alternatives to evaluate, and we can discuss those
Okay.
quotes.
Commissioner McHugh, what did you think of the?
I was initially dubious about going down this road, but after looking at this demonstration on Friday, I think this is really a very useful tool, because it allows you to, in real time, take different events and move them around and see what happens and see what the consequences of moving them around are. And I think that has, as I was thinking about it over the weekend, a number of applications for what we're doing, and that using it here from time to time would be a helpful thing, because we could see for ourselves, but everybody else could see what the
Right.
consequences of doing certain things are. I think, I agree with, I do agree with Commissioner Zuniga that the time when we're gonna need this is for about 18 months. After we get the licensing process finished, this kind of thing I don't think is gonna be terribly helpful to us. So I would agree that the quicker we can get somebody, whether it be a firm or an individual in to get the backloading done, to get this thing up and running, the better off we are. And however we do it, whether it be a firm through a temp agency, or, a firm or a person through a temp agency, I think that's the way we ought to go, and go as quickly as we can.
Okay, great. Well, that's great if you both feel like that. So I think we ought to just go for it. If you're ready to do a quick procurement, let's do it.
Right. Well, my attempt would be to lay out in a, for next meeting, in a quick memo, sort of three alternatives, or including 3 quotes on those alternatives.
So we might be able to make a decision next
Well,
week. That'd be
hopefully.
great.
Yeah,
Okay,
that'd be great.
all right. So we'll target next week for a decision. It'll probably include a recommendation from you, but a decision will be made by the board, by the commission. Okay, Racing Division, mostly that would be Commissioner Cameron. We did talk at last meeting a little bit about some of the possible either workarounds or legislative changes, and I think the two of you were gonna think a little bit about the legal issues involved. Is there anything to report or discuss on that?
I do know.
On the cash flow problem that we talked
Yeah,
about last week?
I do know that Commissioner Cameron asked of our outside counsel to look at language that would have to be required to lift that cap, that statutory cap of that trust fund that we were talking about. I don't know that we have gotten that final language, but that's progressing.
Okay. And we decided there's no great rush here, so we've got some time.
There is no
to push
rush.
this through, right?
No, it's just an early flag that they raised.
All right.
We also just had a meeting with the people from DPL who are in this building. And relative to the approval of certain expenditures, as we discussed in this commission, Commissioner Cameron will be that person for all racing division expenditures. But she wanted to understand the process of approval that goes internally, and the type of expenditures that come before the Racing Commission. And she asked me to join her to help out, so that's why I'm familiar
Okay.
with that. But an agreement was reached that essentially the same mechanism that exists will prevail. They will just summarize for her in a memo
Right.
that she would then, return.
Okay, great. Anything else, racing issues going on? I don't think so. Sorry. We do have our field trip to Plain Ridge scheduled the afternoon of the 21st.
I
Which,
suppose I'm sorry.
yeah,
Okay.
that's all. I was just gonna say, there's no, all logistics are we driving ourselves? I guess we are, right? Yeah,
And Parkland,
okay.
I think Boston, too.
Okay. Project work plan, number 5, getting to the meat of the matter. The notice of the proposed rulemaking, is there anything to report there, Commissioner McHugh?
That has been issued, and it's been posted on our website. It's been circulated in a press release and circulated, I think, by now, have we gotten to the industry folks, or are we
This
still?
afternoon it's gone.
Right, to the industry newspapers and the like. So it's out, it's gonna be open for a month. We'll see what kind of return we get and take it from there.
For the public, this was the request for any advice or reactions on how we draft the rules for our first phase of the request for application, right?
That's right.
Right. And any other suggestions that anybody might have about how to expedite the request for application process, which we're trying to draft up now. Consultant status report.
afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners.
Commissioner
Yeah.
O'Toole.
For the record, I'm Kathleen O'Toole. I'm here to provide the update, the weekly update for the consultants, Michael and Carol and Spectrum. So this week, the deliverables that were provided to the commission included the following reports. First of all, a memo detailing the mandatory job positions that are required under the statute. Second, a memo detailing the executive director's salaries. We were asked to go out and explore other jurisdictions, do a little benchmarking to determine what other jurisdictions were paying. So we submitted that memo. A memo detailing the revenue sources that will eventually exist and how, and that's also supported by a chart that depicts the different revenue sources. And finally, a memo on the RFA Phase 1 proposed timeline. So those were forwarded yesterday to Commissioner McHugh. The team initiated several other activities this week. They are reviewing the act to understand the scope of minimum controls and requirements around rules of the game and gaming equipment under the statute. They're also drafting MOU templates because soon they'll be meeting with the state police, the Attorney General's office, the ABCC to discuss the MOUs. And prior to doing so, we thought it made sense to have some boilerplates available for them to look at, for these different groups to look at, so they could take a look and be prepared for conversations around the specifics. The team continues to work on a number of other activities that we previously reported on, including the ongoing review of the multi-jurisdictional background form and determining the specific adjustments that are required for Massachusetts. And they're also in the process of drafting a Massachusetts supplemental application form. In addition, they continue to assess the RFA Phase 1 Investigations and Enforcement Bureau staffing requirements and options. They're reviewing and documenting anti-money laundering provisions in compliance with applicable federal regulations. In fact, that's a memo that we'll likely have for you during this coming week. They are developing a table of organization and different options for a table of organization to review and discuss with the commission. In fact, the consultants will be in town next week, and I'm hoping that we can set up meetings with some of the commissioners. We could actually use some guidance. I'm not sure which commissioners would be the appropriate ones for them to meet with, but they'd like to present some preliminary options for a table of organization to get some feedback, to engage in some discussion before submitting some final drafts.
A table of organization of what? I missed that. Of the regulations?
The actual table of organization for the
Organizational
the
chart.
ongoing organizational chart.
Yeah, an org
Yeah.
chart,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And they, as I say, they've developed some, they're working on 3 different options for that, but I think it's at a point where they could use some guidance from the commission.
Right.
Is there any reason not to do that at this meeting? I think we'd probably all be interested in talking about that next week, rather than meet with just a smaller group.
It probably, when would they be here?
Well, the plan right now is for them to spend Wednesday and Thursday here because they have other meetings with different state agencies. But I can certainly talk to them about that, but you know, I just wonder if it's premature for that because, again, they really do want to talk about several of the options before committing anything to a draft to be considered
Yeah. I was-
at a commission.
Just thinking who would be the people that they would meet with, and I think a lot of us would have an interest in that. So.
I mean, they're certainly available to meet with, to have a series of meetings while they're here.
And that could, they could certainly get input without any deliberations going on. And at the formative stage, that might be the best process to follow. There are 2 other topics, well, I'll wait until you finish your report, but there are 2 other topics that I think would be worthwhile discussing as well, and maybe those in a public forum would be worthwhile, but let's talk about that in a second.
Okay, thank you. They're in the process now of drafting the RFA Phase 1 regulations, so that's a fairly substantial task, so heads down, everybody's writing away. And they continue, of course, to work with Anderson and Krieger to integrate their legal interpretations into the work that's being done. Other deliverables that are in process include the memo I mentioned that details the anti-money laundering provisions and compliance, the draft RFA Phase 1 regulations. And I think as we start to produce some of them, again, rather than handing them over all at once, we'll probably submit them incrementally, if that makes sense, so that we're not giving them to you all at the last minute. Also, as I mentioned, the draft Massachusetts supplemental application form and the MOUs for the AG, SP, State Police, and ABCC. And again, I should make it clear that those are just draft MOUs because, of course, the input of those agencies will be really important. So that's, those were activities for this week and some of the deliverables that you'll see in the coming week.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, which is great. The only one I've had a chance to read is the near-term hires. And that's, even this one I've only read cursorily, but I think that the bottom line was a recommendation that we move ASAP on, well, we are moving ASAP on executive director. It looked like the consultants thought that we ought to move ASAP on a general counsel too. And it looked like the deputy director for IEB, which is Investigation and Enforcement Bureau,
Enforcement
right?
Bureau.
Yeah, is one that we should get on board, start moving on right away. Is that right? Am I reading that right, that those three are?
Certainly the first two, Chairman.
Yeah.
The director of, we've spoken with Commissioner Cameron on a number of occasions about the director of IEB, the deputy director of IEB, and we noted in some of the reports that we submitted this week that the reporting lines of that position need to be addressed, because we're not concerned, we're not uncertain whether it was a drafting error or whether it was legislative intent, but under the current law, that person would report directly to the chairman as opposed to the executive director. So that will need to be addressed at some point.
Right.
Well, that's one of the things that I thought that maybe we could discuss publicly, because that's right. That's in a memorandum that I circulated today, and we haven't had a chance to look at, but it's there. And I think we need to come to a conclusion on what we're going to do about that, because the memo makes clear the consultant's view that is, there are important consequences for that reporting line. And so I wonder if we could talk about that next week in the public meeting.
With the consultants
With the
around.
consultants, because they have some insights as to
Right,
the consequences of reporting line in one direction or another. So that was one of the ones that I thought would be helpful to talk to them about.
What was the other
But
one?
coming back to it's escaped me for a second, but I know it'll reoccur in just a second.
It's right over there
It's
somewhere.
right over there. But I wonder if we could come back to the near-term hires memo. One of the things that we're going to be free to do soon now with the security pieces in place and with the policies in place is hire the people that we need to begin the process of hiring the people that we need to make this process work. And it seemed to me that each of these people who were mentioned in the key hires memo, the executive director, a general counsel, a director of information technology, a revenue collection manager, were going to be needed in the near future. We could triage and stage how soon they're going to be needed. Some, it may be desirable for the executive director to have a hand in hiring and a choice in hiring. But there's no reason we couldn't begin to put the job description and the hiring process in place so that he or she would be able to make a quick decision from a limited pool
Right.
once they came on board. And others, I think we could think about going ahead and hiring, maybe not the general counsel, but we're at a stage where I think we could use the assistance of internal counsel. We're spending, it's a law-heavy process that we're going to go through and going to continue to go through. And information technology person, we could begin to fold into the organization as early as possible so that he or she could help create the environment in which everything else is going to fit. And the quicker we get that person on board, it seems to me the better we are. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I think I think that's a very good reflection of what appears in the memo.
So I'd like to, perhaps at the next meeting, when all five of us are here, think through somewhat concretely what we ought to be doing in those areas.
I had a chance to go through the memo, and obviously it goes without saying that, you know, getting the executive director on board as soon as possible, as Commissioner McHugh said, to be able to weigh in on some of the hiring decisions. But I had two questions. One quickly, Director of Information Technology, I mean, that's an area where I see obviously our needs are going to grow from a basic, you know, accommodating our IT needs for, you know, a 20-person shop up to, you know, potentially a few hundred working in the agency. Did you have it in mind that Director of IT almost be at the high level, kind of backfill behind them, or somebody who would help us out at the phase we find ourselves entering into?
Again, this is my personal opinion, but I suspect the consultants would agree with me. I think it's really important at this stage to get somebody on board who has who can develop that vision, that long-term vision, and if not, you know, eventually put his or her team together as well.
Okay.
So I would definitely say, my recommendation would be to go with your eventual CIO, your chief technology officer, whatever you choose to call the position, and to have that person on board as soon as possible to develop the plan going forward, because it will be an enormous responsibility going forward, you know, especially once you start to engage in the licensing process and all of that.
And the other thought I had, and obviously we've brought Elaine on to do our communications and media relations, and you suggest that person also do legislative relations, and, you know, I would suggest that be somewhat, that legislative relations piece be really left with you, Mr. Chairman, in terms of, you know, all of our correspondence out to legislators have talked about, you know, feel free to talk to us and introduce ourselves. As a startup organization, I'd be a little reluctant to kind of feel a legislator had to go through a staff contact without going through you.
Well, I think we definitely we're not gonna put legislative relations, I don't think, in Elaine's job, certainly not at this stage of the game. I think we might at some point need somebody, you know, possibly a former rep or senator who really understands the legislative process as we learn more about what we need, how much of a relationship we need with the legislature. And it's in my mind's eye, I've been thinking we might combine that with a sort of a community relations person, you know, somebody that helps relations with the pre-licensing communities and post-licensing communities. But I certainly agree with your point that we're not gonna delegate that away from either me or other commissioners at this point. That's an important connection to make. But I think we'll keep talking about that one, and sometime fairly soon, I think the legislative/community relations, we might look for somebody. We have a possible person for our Director of Administration who has pretty broad IT skills. I'm not really sure how broad, but I certainly think if this person gets through the background check and we hire her, then we can talk about whether she could do it, or whether she could have somebody under her to do it, or whether we need somebody at her level. I just don't know what level. But also, IT in the gambling environment is a very specialized IT, and that may well be something where we're going to want our executive director, who's going to know a lot more about the IT needs of a gaming commission than we know, to be very involved in. Are you,
Well, I don't disagree with that, but as a principal matter, it seems to me the IT director needs to be at a very high level in this, not only for, this is not a technical job, this is an information management, visionary construction job, and that person needs to be, so you may be absolutely, that may be absolutely right. For the short term, that the person we're considering for the administrative director, who does have a strong technical background, could be perfectly adequate. But it seems to me we ought to start thinking about how to advertise and bid for and think about getting somebody in here, so when the executive director comes, at the very least, he or she could have a small pool to select
Right.
from and get somebody on board at that level.
yeah,
So,
yeah, I agree with that. I think the idea of getting these searches going, and you're suggesting we put this off until next week, until Commissioner Cameron's here to be clearer about this, so let's do that. But I think the idea of getting them going, it takes a long time, to tee up
Right.
the pools. And I think getting them going, so we have them ready for the ED is a really good idea. You are ending up serving essentially as our general counsel.
I know.
We couldn't, you noticed that? And we couldn't do any better than that, so,
Well,
and the money's, the price is right. But it's taken up a lot of your time. Are you really feel, though, that a junior counsel as opposed to a more senior, the real general counsel is where we ought to go first?
I think that general counsel, I think we have the power to hire general counsel ourselves, and we may want to think about having counsel for the commission, but in any event, there's enough room, there's enough work here, and there's going to be enough work for a lawyer, so that I think we ought to think about getting a lawyer at least an intermediate level soon.
But your instinct is that it would be that one rather than a senior person first?
I would really like to think that through and talk
Okay.
with all of you collectively about that.
Okay.
But one level or another, I think we need some help in that regard.
Okay. So next week, we'll really talk this through some more. Maybe we could have, if it turns out that the consultants can be here, Commissioner McHugh has got one item on the agenda and another one that will reoccur in a few
It
moments.
just has.
Oh, is that it?
No, it's
Oh.
well, that one's close to my heart, but it is the RFA 1 timeline that ties into that. There's a memo that we have that was part of the deliverables that were circulated and that we can talk about next week, but it has an RFA 1 timeline, broad timeline. But that ties in nicely with some of the comments we received at yesterday's forum. And I would like to see if we could tie that down in broad terms. I know you're already working on some data points, and we need to put something together that we can put out there to help people. So
Right.
that was the other one.
We'll be prepared to discuss that next week then.
I also wanted to bring up a conversation from yesterday in the context of hires, and perhaps in anticipation of next week as we further these discussions. And that's the notion of an ombudsman or mitigation or planner position that is not particularly identified in the Spectrum memo, but one of the takeaways from yesterday was that somebody at that level, given the peculiarities of the local process here in Massachusetts,
Right.
maybe a near-term hire as well. So just want to put that out there as one of the follow-ups from yesterday, and
Yeah.
maybe for next week we can continue.
And I think there's an
Discussion.
opportunity to, because I think again, a takeaway from yesterday is how critical that position might be in the near term, but also looking at other opportunities in the legislation where that position might be able to morph into some other responsibilities, working with our advisory task force once license applications are awarded, doing some of the community and legislative outreach. So, could start off as job description A and then morph into B and C as the timeline progresses.
Right. Right. Okay, so next week, we'll try to be a little more firm about which first hires we're going to get moving on, but that was a really helpful memo. Thanks. Anything else? Oh, well, this is just a sort of an aside, but the memo mentions that the commission has one source of revenue of operating funds at the moment, which is the loan, $15 million loan from the rainy day fund, and that no other money is available to operate by the statute until the application monies begin to come in, the application fees. But we do have this phenomenon of our 15 million lapses a year from June 30th. So it's not there, so it is something we have to just kind of bear in mind. It's not, we got to think way in advance about what the plan and strategy and need is, not this far in advance, but, in 6 months, we need to have a pretty well strategy thought out for what we're going to ask the legislature to do. Otherwise, the money evaporates on a year from June 30th. Okay, I think anything else that we wanted from our consultant?
Jim, I think
Thank
that's
you
it
for all that
mostly.
stuff. It's
Well,
great.
Thank you. Thank
Great.
you
Good
for
stuff.
for
Yeah.
working hard. I just get to report on the
Yeah.
results. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good, thank you very much.
Okay, technical and other assistance to communities. We started to talk about this a little bit from yesterday's meeting. We had an incredible, for anybody who didn't attend, we had a really, really useful community mitigation meeting yesterday, which had a very interesting panel talk about community mitigation needs, community mitigation issues. There was a woman from Henderson, Nevada, who had been the town manager for a suburb of Las Vegas for many years, during which 3 casinos were licensed. And certainly out of, I think, that conversation came a heightened sense on our part that the potential host and potential surrounding communities have a tremendous need for assistance. B, there isn't much out there yet. And C, we wanted to move even more quickly on this than we had already been thinking about. And thus came the suggestion that we might want to think about an ombudsman who could be the focal point for pulling together that effort and give an identifiable face to communities that they could reach out to. And also, as Commissioner McHugh just referred to, we decided at our open meeting yesterday that we would try to draft some kind of a sort of an advisory piece, which would include both a schedule for the RFA process as we see it unfolding and the community steps within that, and maybe some indication that support will be forthcoming, and that given the timeline isn't so contracted, the communities can kind of take a deep breath and not feel like they're being bums rushed into a process they're not ready for. Those were I think the major takeaways from yesterday, which was a tremendously valuable meeting. We got the RFA timeline draft from the consultant, which I haven't even looked at yet, and we might work a little bit on, start thinking about how we would put together a couple-page memorandum for communities. The help is coming. I might take a stab at and see if I can just circulate something that we can talk about. And I think we've all agreed we want to start looking for a person, possibly for 2, certainly we pretty much for sure, we think we're interested in an ombudsman type person for the community relations, but that may be the same person that would be the ombudsman for the participants to deal with state agencies. I think we could consolidate that into one person. And I think we agreed yesterday that we want to start looking. So I think we'll start out with easy steps, which is asking some state agencies, do you have any really good people you might want to give us or loan us? But we're probably going to have to do a job description and post a position and do a search sometime pretty soon.
The other thing, Mr. Chairman, that we talked about yesterday and that I think we ought to follow up on is this idea of putting together some kind of an advisory group. We have
Yes, good.
those
Right, thank you.
statutory bodies. I'm not sure that we can fill them yet because they are statutorily, there are certain positions statutorily designated that don't exist yet.
Right.
But some of the people, both in the audience and on the panel, had some really good ideas about creation of a community checklist, for example, and the kinds of things that ought to be in there. And if we could even get an informal advisory board to help us with people from different regions, I think that'd be good, both substantively and in terms of reaching out to the community and showing them that we're doing it.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Thank you for reminding me. And we had thought maybe that the ombudsman type person might staff those advisory commissions. So that's a good, I will follow through on that. And I guess there's been nothing else, Commissioner McHugh, in terms of advisory opinions that you've needed to send out to people?
No, we have decided, Elaine Driscoll and I talked about this and have decided that instead of trying to reply to each of those inquiries on a day-to-day basis as they come in, that we would send a acknowledgement as soon as they come in, put them in a queue, and then within a week, try to get an answer out to each person who sends a question. The reason for that, or who asks a question, the reason for that being that a lot of the questions tend to deal with a topic that's hot at a given moment, or that's sparked by some kind of an event, and it's easier to answer those questions as a group, give the same answer to everybody, and do them periodically. So that's what we're going to do. Bringing to the commission still those that need a commission policy decision. Yeah.
Okay, anything else on that, technical assistance? Something just went through my mind. Okay, I think we're at item 5D. We have President William Messner, Bill Messner, the president of Holyoke Community College, and his team to make a presentation to us about a very exciting project. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. And along with me, flanking, well, I thought they were going to flank me, but on the right-hand side here is Jeff Hayden, who's VP for Community and Business Development at Holyoke Community College. And the good-looking fellow down there in the end is Bob LePage, who is director of TWO, Training Workforce Options, which is a collaborative initiative between Springfield Technical Community College and Holyoke Community College for the purpose of customized job training and general workforce development. We came today to discuss workforce development with you. We've prepared a very brief presentation. I believe each of you have a copy of that. If you don't, we brought extra copies along with us. And just to reinforce things, up there on the wall are the slides themselves, which we're going to very quickly go through. In addition to that,
Excuse me, Bill. Can the audience see the screen? They can. Okay, great.
okay. In addition to that, I've got two other documents I'd like to leave with you. We'll reference them in a bit. But to get started, we understand full well that one of the underlying motivators behind the legalization of casino gambling in the Commonwealth was the notion that the advent of this industry would generate jobs, badly needed jobs for the citizens of this state. We also understand, and I believe you're coming to that realization as well, that there are challenges inherent in the development of those jobs. On the screen and the first slide, we tried to give a bit of scope to the overall challenge, that collectively, the projected 10,000 more or less employees that are going to be generated from these casinos would place these among the top 10 private sector employers in the state. In our area of the state, Western Massachusetts, where one of these casinos may well be established, a casino of the sort of 3,000 employees would be one of the 3 top private sector employees in the region. The challenge is then to generating that kind of workforce in the regions of the state are significant. And in the next slide, we've tried to identify some of the specific elements of that challenge. Just to name a few, ensuring training for that number of individuals for maintaining the integrity of the industry is certainly a key challenge. Ensuring a net job gain for the state, the whole issue of, are these jobs going to be focused on citizens of the Commonwealth, particularly citizens who are badly in need of jobs, or are others, particularly others outside of the state, going to move in and take these jobs is an issue. And perhaps the key short-term issue, creating a qualified entry-level pool of professional employees. As we've chatted with some folks who are knowledgeable about the gaming industry, the notion of gearing up a workforce on the order of 3,000 individuals is a task that many of them have never faced before. It's a challenge. And that's where we believe the Massachusetts community colleges come in. Because Massachusetts community colleges, the 15 community colleges, have been in the business of workforce development for, in the terms of Holyoke Community College, which is the oldest community college in the state. We've been in the business for 65 years. And perhaps more importantly, many of the jobs that we're going to be talking about are in areas that we are already delivering training. In the business areas, in the security areas, in the IT areas, in the hospitality areas, and we can go right down the list. Much of that are areas of training that we have a long history. It's part of our mission, and perhaps the key element in all this is that the 15 community colleges have a deep history of regional collaborations, which we believe are going to be key to facing the challenge of developing a quality workforce. We, the 15 community colleges, can't do it on our own. We need to collaborate with the other elements of the workforce development system, region by region, to meet this challenge. The next couple slides are admitted. The next slide is a bit of a PR piece relative to why we believe we are the, for lack of a better word, premier workforce training vendor in the state, and hopefully we'll be able to convince you of that fact as well. At the time of the signing of this legislation, which now goes back some 4, 5, 6 months, the 15 community colleges as a group decided they needed to, number one, respond to this challenge and do it in an organized fashion. And so at that point in time, we began the job of crafting the Massachusetts Community College System Casino Careers Training Institute. And one of the documents that we've put before you is, I believe, a 2 or 3 page outline of that institute, which has been signed on by all 15 community college presidents. That agreement stipulates that we will set up regional training sites, one for each casino, that we will do so in collaboration with the regional workforce system, and that it will be an organized effort and one which we would hope we would do in collaboration with you, the Gaming Commission. The goals of the Institute are fairly simple. We want to help people get a job, we want to help people do a better job and get a better job. The role of the Institute, the next slide, collaborate with the Commission in support and awarding prospective employee certification and licensures. Going down that slide, defining and delivering curricular and credentials for critical occupations, and perhaps at this point in your planning process, serving as a resource to you, we would hope, particularly in terms of drawing on what other states have done in terms of meeting the challenge of workforce development. The next slide is one that I'm sure you're very familiar with, the 3 regions, which then are overlaid by the fact that those 3 regions, each one of them are populated by 3 or 4 of our community colleges. What we have done in the memorandum of agreement, we have established lead institutions in each region. Not knowing where these casinos are going to be sited, in each of the regions, one or more community college has taken up the role of interim regional lead to begin developing this regional collaboration.
Who are they?
In the West, it's 2, Training Workforce Options, HCC, and STIC. In the north, if you will, the northeast, it is Middlesex, and in the southeast, it is Massasoit. Now, again, those may well change depending on the site. In addition to that, we have partnered with what we believe is the premier gaming training institution in the form of a community college in the nation, Atlantic Cape Community College. The other document I've put in front of you is a letter of agreement which we recently signed with Atlantic Cape Community College to utilize, to be the sole utilizer, if that's a term, of their gaming curriculum in the state of Massachusetts. Atlantic Cape, situated in New Jersey, developed their gaming curriculum some 20 years ago, more or less, has since that time seen their curriculum used in other states. Delaware, Pennsylvania, West Virginia are 3 in which their gaming curriculum has been used. And we will also be using it here in the state of Massachusetts. Again, the focus of that curriculum is on the gaming elements of the industry. The other elements that we mentioned before, we're going to be drawing on curriculum which we, quite frankly, have already developed and will be tweaking, if you will, to meet the needs of the casino industry. And then the final slide is simply a proposed employability certification process that we would suggest you at least consider as you go down this route of meeting the workforce challenge. Beginning with career advice and employability application, running through background and residency checks, the basic skills provision, certification, examination, and high-stakes testing, and then winding up with an employability certificate awarded by the Commission. So the bottom line is Massachusetts community colleges have, as an integral part of our mission, meeting the workforce needs of the state. This is one of the more significant challenges in terms of workforce this state has ever faced. We want to be part of it. Quite frankly, we should be part of it. And we would hope that you would agree and that we could partner together in terms of, number one, developing a workforce plan that would meet the needs of these establishments, and number two, in terms of providing you with best practices as we can identify them from across the country that will then hopefully inform your work as the Gaming Commission. End the presentation.
That's great.
It's terrific,
Thank you.
yeah.
That really is.
It's great. Anybody, go ahead, if you have questions or?
Has any other jurisdiction, to your knowledge, had a employability certification process like this one?
Let me turn to my,
Pennsylvania uses a similar process. New Jersey uses a similar process, particularly for the licensure relative to gaming positions.
So
There's a multiple tiered system. The employability certificate essentially allows you to be associated with certain occupations that are, I guess I would define as being associated with gaming or handling of money, or in some cases, security. It's the non-back of house operations relative to customer service. And then on top of that is usually an employability certificate relative to that specific occupation. And that's where the curriculum and the licensure process used by Atlantic Cape would dovetail. So step one would be, you in fact now meet the guidelines to be employed. Step two, you're now trained for that occupation. And then that occupation is often certified as well. So you are certified as a dealer, a table gamesman, could be an IT or any other position that the commission would define, as has happened in other states.
And could, in these other programs, could somebody come in, for example, at step, could somebody come in and after a suitable background investigation, go right to the testing process without having to go through a training program? Say somebody is
Yes,
a dealer who wants to come back home.
Yeah, there's usually a couple provisions relative to your question. One, the jobs are broken into classification levels, which would be related to the degree of skills required and the degree of involvement within gaming. So if you think of the employability certificate being stage one, then it kind of fingers out like this, so that the different types of occupations have different requirements and are licensed by the commission in other states appropriately. A back of house service position, maybe within a hotel, may require no additional significant training and direct into employment, versus something that might be a gaming customer service oriented position that's associated with the gaming itself, which would require a certification of that process. Others, as they would go up the skill set ladder, would have different requirements. So they're broken into job classifications. And the commission in other states sets that classification and then is the source for ensuring the integrity of the process. As I understand it, is within the bill here in this state to follow that same process or something similar.
So under this process, the community colleges could do both the training and the certification, but could, the high-stakes testing that would demonstrate the competence of the person, whether or not the person had gone through the training program. In other words, somebody
Correct.
who'd been in the field for a long time,
Yeah.
could take the test, pass it.
Yeah, in other states, they'll recognize credentials from other neighboring states. For instance, in Pennsylvania, they recognize some credentials that were awarded in New Jersey and Delaware and West Virginia in their planning process that allowed somebody who was certified in those other states to essentially have almost like a reciprocal agreement to allow them to become employed in the state of Pennsylvania. So again, that was set within the framework established by the commission of what those specific institutions were. And I think that, again, the value in the front end and the employability certificate is that could be done in partnership with the workforce investment boards and the one-stop centers who would feed into that system, because the volume of individuals that would have to be moved into that system would be very significant. And certain individuals that might be into lower skilled jobs would be coming through that existing infrastructure. So our goal is to leverage what's in place now most effectively and appropriately.
So at a very high level.
Excuse me, just one
Yeah.
sec. Is the mic working for people who are listening online? Is there a way for you to tell?
Hold that up.
You can hear all right? Okay, fine, good.
So at a very high level, this really thoughtful process would require collaboration between the community colleges and the commission to develop regulations and a path of entry into a certification that would enable people to have a job.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, as well as that progression up that pathway.
Yes.
Because the
Right.
industry does have a tradition of trying to advance its employees up the
Right.
path.
Right.
It seems to me that there's two different things here. One is you, on your own hook, can definitely decide to train personnel for the casino industry and related industries. We don't have to have anything to do with that particularly. But there's the issue of whether or not and the extent to which we delegate or share with you some kind of employment certification licensing process. I think we're probably a long way from knowing, what the issues are and from making an agreement to do that. Seems logical, but, and we're certainly open to it, but.
That's one of the things that we'd be happy to lay out for you. What are those
Right.
issues? What are those elements? Your initial statement about we can certainly do the training.
Just a minute, we're getting a hand signal from the. Oh, the microphone
Oh,
back.
okay. Your initial statement relative to we can do the training, that's true. We don't need necessarily your blessing on that. What we do need, however, is in one fashion or another, your support. And a part of that support is ultimately going to become someone needs to support financially that training program. There are obviously a couple of different options there. There can be the individuals who are being trained. There are the potential employers, and there is also the possibility of the state, particularly at the front end. If the goal here is to have a pool of workers ready for these new organizations, that, it seems to me, is going to take a degree of state support in one fashion or another. Certainly the community colleges are ready and willing to do a significant amount of planning in that regard. But ultimately, in terms of putting training programs in place and the like, particularly if the focus is, and again, I'll use the Western Massachusetts example, if the focus is on those elements in gateway cities like Springfield and Holyoke, turning to those individuals to support their own training is going to be a significant challenge. And I would hope that the state would see fit that it would be a very wise investment on the state's part to be a partner in that.
Are you basically talking about scholarships in effect for?
Well, not so, well,
Tuition and fee
scholarships
subsidies?
or simply some sort of contractual relationship to support the training program itself.
But something which would replace the tuition and fees that the
Yeah.
student would otherwise pay?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you could, if the students could afford the tuition and fees, you could afford to do the program. But the question is whether the target market or enough of the target employment market can afford the tuition and fees.
Yeah, absolutely. The
Yeah.
model there that comes most quickly to mind is adult basic education, and particularly English as a second language. The city of Holyoke, 50% of the population is Latino. 80% of the school department is Latino. Many of those are individuals who particularly, the governor focused on middle skills jobs. These are individuals who, with an appropriate amount of training, could be ready for those jobs without having to go through years of education. But that's going to necessitate some level of investment.
And I would add that that model is done differently in different states, that it becomes a way, it becomes part of the process for different types of jobs within the casino employment, that in some states, the gaming jobs and the funding of those going into gaming jobs has been done different than the general employability for that industry sector. So again, it may go back to building a plan and a model that might have multiple funding sources. The time of employment when they are engaged for employment can have an impact on the type of federal funding or state funding that may be a way to cover the cost of preparing them for that workforce. So again, I think that's part of the next stage of developing some models or plans that would lay out the options for the committee, or commission, excuse me, to look at and reflect, and also to see how that would leverage within the current workforce structure of the state, with the community colleges playing a role in helping to develop that plan. To move this number of employees into new jobs without cannibalizing our existing employers in the state is a very, very significant challenge. It is one that we have heard concerns of from some of the employers in our region. And while one would think it would be primarily from other entertainment-based organizations, I recently met with a very significant healthcare organization who is also, in fact, very concerned that if we don't create net jobs and prepared workforce, that they would lose back-of-house operations to the casino industry. So we really feel that a systematic process that will create a larger pool of qualified, and qualified is the key word, no matter the type of employer that we speak with, anywhere in the state, maybe even anywhere in the country, that is key to all of this. While there are pools of available candidates, they are not qualified even at some of the entry-level positions to be successful. And we know that a better job on the front end reduces costs long-term. The industry could see as much as 25 to 50% turnover in the unskilled jobs in the first two to 3 years. And we want to mitigate that as much as possible with a very effective, streamlined process on the front end that is skill-based.
You would think that would give them some financial incentive to be participants themselves.
Absolutely.
Right, because there's a high cost to them of that kind of turnover.
And in other states, the casinos themselves have through either the normal pool, the revenue pool, or through a special pool, have supported the startup of creation of a labor pool, because we have the elements of creation of a labor pool and sustainability of a labor pool.
Right.
The startup phase, as you know, is much more significant. The sustainability often then switches to a different business model. I give this example: if it was Toyota coming here today to open a significant auto plant with 5,000 workers, the model would be very similar and a similar challenge. In that case, it would be the state who would be attracting them by providing a pathway to employees. In this case, we are attracting some very significant employers, but we need to be prepared to give them the workforce that will be required to make them as competitive as possible in the region, and nationally and globally.
How can you prevent the cannibalization that you mentioned a minute ago?
The key to preventing the cannibalization is, one, good career awareness on the front end of what the jobs really are. Because people tend to go into pathways because they don't understand the expectations of the jobs. Two, we have to recruit people who can move up their ladder of employment. We have to look for people who can backfill to those other organizations. The key is a systematic process. In states that haven't developed a systematic process for their casino industries, they have met very significant challenges. Probably the closest, most recent one was the challenges in Maine with Oxford when they tried to open their facility there. They really had some challenges down to the last minute of getting a labor pool of qualified applicants. And even as close as, I guess, a decade and a half ago, in Connecticut. They went into it with some splintered strategy in their workforce, and as I know, the Commission is probably aware, and others may be aware, the training in Connecticut was actually done in Rhode Island because the Foxwood facility and the state of Connecticut local training providers couldn't get aligned on the front end, so they moved over the border into Westerly and used that as their training site, and in fact gave some preference to hiring to those who were citizens of Rhode Island. And we feel that a systematic approach is really, really important here so that we can employ and give opportunities for the people of the Commonwealth.
And I think, Commissioner, it's also trying to work with folks who need adult basic education, English for speakers of other language, or, introductory workforce development training to get them into that pathway. I mean, we have that paradox where we have, a high number of jobs, some jobs that are left wanting for someone to fill, and yet we have high levels of unemployment, especially in the gateway cities. So I think it's about bringing more of those folks into the workforce with that basic training and that basic pathway. Also, it's about creating pathways within careers so that those who might start at a mid-level or above can move up and continue to fill those ranks with other folks who are being trained. So, it's about building the capacity of our workforce system. In Western Massachusetts, we hear all the time about the need to add more machinists with the advanced precision machining industry. And yet, there's a gap of 250 jobs that everyone talks about. And it's a mystery why we don't fill them. Well, it's because we need to get the right people connected. We need to have the partnerships with the one-stops and the reps and the community colleges and the vocational schools, and get those people connected to those who need the training, and then get them into the job.
I just want to mention, I commend you, Mr. President, with you and your colleagues for thinking about it in terms of joining forces and creating this memorandum of agreement. But I also wanted to ask, even though there will be a number of months and years before a casino is operational in Massachusetts, we get that question all the time. But workforce development is really a long lead item. And you allude to that in your presentation relative to the systematic process and the workforce plan. But is there anything that you can tell us relative to that broad timeline of
I mean, how much time we will actually
how much
need?
time, you would need to develop a plan, to a curriculum,
Yeah.
or whatever the steps.
Well,
may be.
I'm not sure I can give you a definite amount of time, but it seems to me as best I can assess the calendar here that you're facing, and I understand that hasn't been nailed down exactly yet. But I do think that we're going to need, I would speculate, perhaps a year to get ourselves positioned such that we're ready to begin in terms of putting training programs in place. And the reason I say that is in part because this is a regional effort. Some of the regions are better positioned than others concerning this collaborative focus. Quite frankly, in the West, I think we're well positioned in terms of the collaborative history that we have with the one-stops and the reps. One of the elements of this effort is to use the West as a model for the rest of the state. That as we put our complex, for lack of a better word, into place, the other regions of the state can model themselves on that. We also need, quite frankly, to sit down and draw out the training programs themselves that are needed. Some are being provided by Atlantic Cape. Others we need to with some specificity, lay out for ourselves. We have training programs in IT, but whether they specifically meet the needs of the casino industry or not, that needs yet to be determined. And then finally, all the rest of that surrounds the training programs needs to be put in place. And that's where working with the commission particularly is going to be significant. And that's why it leads me to believe that this is a good 12-month process to get all of this nailed down so that when you're ready to specify it's going to be this and this and this in the 3 regions of the state, we're ready to sit down with those developers and put in place training programs that after another 12, 18, 24 months, whatever that time frame is, to actually get these casinos built. By that point in time, we'll have a workforce ready for them.
And is there a structure now in place through this agreement, which I haven't read, that would permit a facile negotiation back and, or not, working together, partnership, working together to develop this statewide?
That again varies from region to region.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think we're much further along in the West than perhaps some other of the regions.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have been attempting, and I think succeeding in doing, is number one, rolling out this model and educating others in other regions as to what the model entails. We'll be better positioned to say yes to that question, I would argue, by the end of this summer.
Okay.
Do you see yourself having a role in the southeast region if the tribal compact is completed and voted upon? How do you see the system working down?
Yeah. The simple answer is yes. The more complex answer is, and Bob may have a better handle on this than I, my hunch, and it's just a hunch at this point, is that there's going to be some differences. Exactly what those differences are at this point, I'm not quite sure.
Well, as I understand the regulatory, excuse me. As I understand, the regulatory process will be very similar, as it relates to employment certification and licensure and governance relative to maintaining the integrity of the game. Will be within the commission's realm to set those guidance. So the workforce elements would be the same.
We don't know. I mean,
I would
presumably there'll be a tribal gaming commission, which will have some of the authorities that we have
Right,
now.
a mirror.
Yeah, but we don't really know.
Right,
How that's gonna work.
in other states where there's Native American gaming, some of the regulations relative to the quality and integrity of the game sit within the state commission, which
Right.
would include the licensure of those positions.
Right.
So that would be the workforce employability elements. Again, I think that's something that, as the community college looks to work with partners, we could work collaboratively with the commission of, again, sharing best practices that we've been analyzing over the past months. And I'd also just like to address the commissioner's observation about timelines. When you look at some of the jobs within the industry and the skilled jobs, the ones that we are going to require an associate's degree or higher, developing that labor pool for IT, where we know there's significant shortages of IT workers, particularly in pockets of this state. For us to be successful, we have to increase our total output of IT workers. So we have to start thinking 2 to 2.5 years in advance of the opening or hiring at that facility. Because the IT workers may come on board 6 months during the soft opening of the construction period to be trained on the specifics. So we really need to be recruiting students in some occupations as much as 3 or 2.5 years before, so that they can move through the curriculum and any external certifications, because some of the certifications required in the environment, for example, in IT, are not necessarily casino certifications, they're industry certifications, Microsoft Plus, Oracle, whatever they may be. So we could have a need to ramp up certain occupations. I call them constraining occupations because the market is constrained now for those key occupations, and if we don't increase our total throughput, we'll just cannibalize. And they are hard high-growth, high-wage jobs that employers in the state don't want to lose from. So, again, getting a framework for those, I guess I'll call them open to fill jobs because they don't require a licensure, a gaming licensure, is something that the colleges will be focused on, as well as other higher education institutions will need to be focused. Some of them will require a bachelor's degree.
I think this is a great thing, and I'm really excited that you all are working on this. A couple of questions are, this presumably, the governor's been trying to encourage community college collaboration. I assume this is something that is right in their wheelhouse. Is this something that the secretary is supportive of and the governor is supportive of as well?
I would expect. We've had discussions, not certainly with the governor, but with other individuals in the administration relative to this, and we've met with nothing but positive responses. So I would hope that would reach all the way up to the highest reaches of the state government. It certainly, as you indicate, does address some of the questions / issues that have been put forward over the last year relative to workforce. We're proud of our history in terms of workforce development, but we also know we're not perfect. We know there have been issues addressed, and to the extent that this effort can help us in that regard, that would be an added benefit.
Right. Is there a place in the process for any kind of coordination or collaboration with the state universities or UMass?
Is there a system? I'm not sure. Formal system, perhaps not. But on the other hand, we're talking with those folks all the time. So to the extent that, as Bob indicated, in those areas where bachelors and even beyond might be necessary, I don't envision any problem at all in terms of wrapping those folks in. In fact, one of the notion of two training workforce options was that STIC and HCC would provide the core of that workforce development outreach in the Holyoke Springfield area, but then we'll be drawing in the Westfields, the UMass Amhersts, even the private institutions, and that could certainly be the case here as well.
Yeah.
And they do currently have some capacity and expertise within the hotel and casino that would be leveraged.
Right.
Again, I think that's a different dialogue than the licensure position that
Right.
fit within the
Right.
direct realm
Right.
of the commission. Those are more labor pool development, but should be part of a statewide strategy.
Yeah, and to the extent possible, you'd want to coordinate with them a little, let's see, just see what else I had to say here. I'm sure this is in your mind, but it's in our legislation to be very attentive to diversity and affirmative action issues. And, you will be doing yourselves a favor and doing the industry a favor if you can have a real feeder system with
Yeah.
diverse candidates. It's a crucial
And
element of this.
one of the reasons that community colleges were established and are supported is to provide access.
Right.
And access, particularly in the last 20 to 30 years, has taken on more of a focus on that diversity issue. Such that certainly Springfield and Holyoke have grown substantially in terms of the diversity of our student bodies, and I think you'll see that across the state. That is a core part of our mission.
Right. I think in general, we're a long way from saying anything about whether we can be financially involved or how that could work
Sure.
or whatever, but I think it's safe to say everybody is very interested in and supportive of the idea. I think it's great that you're out there thinking about it, and we will certainly be more than receptive to ideas, strategies as you're studying how these programs are funded, what the needs are and so forth.
Yeah.
We're game to be a part of that. And I agree with, I think, your sense that although the casinos are a long way off, it's not a long way off in terms of this planning cycle. So you'll have to move pretty quickly. We're talking about getting our own Gantt chart that shows us our project. and
Yeah.
You can't do your Gantt chart until we can get ours started that says,
Yeah.
when's a casino gonna open? But in general, you know the timelines we're working with, and there's no time to waste to
Yeah.
get this up and running.
Well, we just wanted to ensure that what we were doing in the direction we were heading in, not only paralleled the direction that the commission is going in, but that you saw it as something that could support your efforts. And if what we're hearing today is that we seem to be going down the same path, then we'd like to continue in that direction. And as I said before, we see the next steps as to continue to develop a stream of what we'll call best practices, and to the extent that you can utilize that information, that's terrific. And then also to develop at least the outlines of what we would see as a workforce development plan, the elements of that, provide that to you, and then see where we go from there.
I think it's important, somebody from UMass shared with us the other day that the casinos coming into Massachusetts is kind of economic development flipped on its head, because it's not, you made the analogy of the big auto worker with lots of jobs. We'd be tripping over ourselves to try to offer them support. Well, this is one area where we feel we need to offer, I feel we need to offer support, because conversely, as we heard yesterday, communities will begin to feel the impacts of a big importation of people to come in and work to the casinos, as opposed to, the local job opportunities. In the commission, it does have an opportunity to write regulations related to licensing employees, minimum training requirements, as well as certification of training schools. So from a consumer protection end of it, we don't have, a young man or woman going to, XYZ school of gaming who throw their money away essentially on a certification that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. And admittedly, one of our motivations in getting here and in front of you was, to the extent that we can, to preclude that sort of what we think negative development, which has evidently been generated in some other states. We think we can deliver quality education at the lowest cost possible, consistent with high quality.
Actually, that's a really interesting point. I'm sure that there are going to be for-profit ventures that are potentially relatively fly-by-night that could try to exploit this situation and exploit unknowing consumers. So I think it's a really good point.
Yeah.
And if in your work and doing best practices and checking what's happened in other jurisdictions, you see some such experiences, I think we could play a role in counseling the public, helping to counsel the public not to get snookered. So let us know if you learn about that kind of stuff.
That's fine.
And I'm sure others, the Attorney General and others would want to be involved in that too.
And I think there's an ongoing relationship as we begin to set those licensing requirements for employees of the casinos to, one, invite your feedback through the regulatory process, but also invite, it's helpful for you to understand and explain to, people going through a training program what their bare minimum essentials are going to be beyond what they're going to need to know in the classroom.
Fine.
By inclination, I never like to end a meeting like this without a next step. I hear you talking about by the end of the summer you may be in a better position. Could we schedule another check-in of some kind for early September?
I think that would be fine, and I think that would be consistent with where we think we're going. Again, we would like to develop for you a outline, if you will, of a workforce development plan. And by the end of the summer, I think we'd be ready to sit down and discuss that with you. I think also by the end of the summer, some of these best practices, including what the chairman just addressed, we could have ready for you. And then finally, getting our act together across the 3 regions, and we could report back to you then as well, that this has happened in the Northeast and the Southeast and the like. In fact, at that point in time, it might be helpful to bring representatives
Right.
from the 2
Right.
other regions along with us,
Right.
and they can reflect on their
Sure,
experience.
sure. So perhaps we could think about, and we work out the precise detail later, another session in September.
Sure.
Sometime to see where we are.
Yeah.
We'd be glad to do that.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you very
Oh,
much.
yeah.
Good. Thank
Go
you
with-
very much.
Go with
Thank you.
our
Appreciate it.
wind in your sails. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Commissioners Stebbins and Zuniga, for
Yeah, that's great.
coming
That's
across
really
this one.
great.
Yeah, it's
great.
a really exciting project. Okay, charitable gaming. Anything to talk about or report on?
Not a great deal. I met this week with the representatives of the Attorney General's office. I'm meeting Thursday morning with the representative of the Town Clerks Association. I've got the name now of some representatives of the charitable gaming users, people who do it. And I'm going to reach out to them and have some thoughts that we'll be ready to share at a high level soon. And then the reporting piece is on schedule.
Good. That reminds me, I forgot to mention when we were talking about item 5C, the technical assistance to other communities, that Commissioner Stebbins and I have been talking about getting Mass Development. We're going to meet with Mass Development to talk about whether they can play some role in this servicing of the communities. And also, there was someone from the Collins Center at our mitigation meeting yesterday, and I think we can expect a proposal from them pretty soon.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, Finance and Budget, Commissioner Zuniga.
Yes, thank you. Just one minor, or just one item. Commissioner Cameron is planning a trip to Pennsylvania to visit and tour 2 casinos with a racing track, one in Chester and one in Bensalem, Pennsylvania, along with our consultant and other members of the Pennsylvania Control Board. She will also have meetings there. This is all with the Pennsylvania Control Board. This is all in relative to the assessment that we have of the racing operations ongoing. A budget that she has put together here for round-trip tickets, hotel, meals, etc., is estimated to be $2,000, not to exceed $2,000. So I'm submitting this line item for approval on a budget basis for those travels.
Okay, we've known this is coming. I don't think we need a vote, do we, on this?
Well, I assume that as not a budgeted item that I would submit for approval on a budget basis.
I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it sort of seems setting a precedent for a level of detail that I don't know if we want to get into. I think this is discretionary
Fair enough.
expenditure.
I agree. I don't
That's
think
fair
we
enough.
have to.
Okay.
I think we disclose it.
That's-
and, so
Right.
the public can see it, but I don't think we need a vote
Right.
for each of these things.
Right.
That is just the report of that upcoming
Which is great.
expenditure.
That, I think, is important.
That's important.
Right, that's
Right.
important. Particularly travel, because travel, we're probably going to have to do a fair amount of it, and travel is one of those things that can be controversial. So we want it to be very well understood and transparent. But were you going to say anything to?
No, I agree with you in terms of, setting aside the amount that we expect to be expended, but, it's also important to remind folks that this is key to our consultant completing her evaluation, kind of having an opportunity to share some other best practices with Commissioner Cameron and our oversight of the Racing Commission.
Right, good point. Okay, anything else on that? Budget finance?
That's it.
Public education and information, maybe you can addressed this issue, Commissioner McHugh, better than anybody. There's been some increase from the press and elsewhere about various steps that are being proposed by the Secretary of State and/or by the Campaign Finance Office. And we've been asked whether we're going to play a role in reacting to, supporting, opposing, whatever. And it seemed like it's a topic that we should discuss. Do you have the particulars at your fingertips?
I do, Mr. Chairman. There are two proposals that are now in existence. One is a proposal from the Office of Campaign and Political Finance informally to amend the regulations that they've issued to deal with contributions made by gaming license applicants to local officials and boards. And the Office of Campaign and Political Finance, with whom we have met, Commissioner Stebbins and I met with a representative from that office, is going to hold a public hearing on that subject in July, I believe, on the subject of those regulations. Basically, those regulations will restate what General Laws, Chapter 23K, Section 47 says, and it, in essence, says that all political contributions but made by an applicant for a gaming license to a municipality must be disclosed by the applicant to the Gaming Commission and the city or town clerk of the community to which the contributions have been made. So that process is going forward. We talked with them a bit, we talked with the office a bit about when one becomes an applicant for purposes of this regulation kicking in, and whether after one becomes an applicant, there can be a look-back provision that would capture contributions made before the person becomes an applicant. That's something that we can consider for ourselves, whether or not the office requires ultimately in its regulation that to be reported. But we'll have another chance to see that, talk about it, think about it as the regulation process goes forward. So that's one piece that's on going right now. The other piece is House 4049, and that's the bill that the Secretary of State sponsored, among others. It was introduced not by the Secretary of State, of course, but as I understand it, he is sponsoring it. And that basically says, and there was a hearing on it before the appropriate House committee recently, that says, in essence, this: anybody who spends money favoring or opposing, and I'm quoting now, a question submitted to the voters of a city or town concerning the issuance of a license for a gaming establishment in that city or town in accordance with our statute, Clause 13 of Section 15 of Chapter 23K, shall file reports disclosing the expenditures at certain periods before the vote actually takes place. On the 60th day prior to the election, on the 5th and 20th day of each month, getting closer, and at staggered intervals up till the time the vote is taken. So both political committees that are formed to support or oppose it, and individuals and other groups who are formed to support and oppose those, the subject of those votes would be, if this bill were enacted, required to make those reports. So that's a summary of the proposals that are in existence at the moment. Whether we support those, the latter proposal or not, is something that we can talk about. Disclosure and of where money to support or oppose a referendum of this type in the city or town is an important aspect of transparency that we have said from the outset we're in favor of. There are, I think, some First Amendment questions that may lurk in these regulations under certain circumstances. But in general, it would seem that disclosure is a helpful thing for everybody to know. But so that's as far as I'm going to go at the moment.
Well, one question that came up was, would we post the first category of contributions, I think, would we post on our website if there were a list of contributions to political officials in target communities, would we post that list that the Office of Campaign Finance would also post? And I think I said through Elaine, almost for sure, that seems like it would be something logical to include. We didn't take a position particularly on the regulation. We just said if that were available, that would be yet another thing probably makes sense for us to post. But it does come up whether we will be proactively supportive of either or both of these two things.
Insofar as the first one is concerned, the statutory one, that's there. The disclosure has to be made.
Oh, it's already
required
there.
by
Oh, okay.
statute.
Okay.
And the regulations that the Office of Campaign and Political Finance is proposing, or is going to propose, I'm not exactly certain as to what stage their process has reached. Those are simply implementing regulations of a statutory obligation.
Okay.
23K, Section 46, has certain requirements with respect to this issue. 23K, Section 47 talks about disclosure of contributions. So that's there, and we have no real choice but to implement it. That the legislature's decided that. The other one, and so maybe we could stop there and talk about that for a second. The question there is, and I think we need a little bit more detail in a memorandum for all of us to consider as to what the regulation ought to look like. Should there be a reach-back provision? That is it permissible to have a reach-back provision so that once an applicant filed an application and became an applicant who was required to report, that applicant would be required to report not only contributions made after the application was filed, but also contributions for a set period of time before the application was filed. I mean, that's one approach that's conceivable. In fact, under Section 46, it's doubtful that any contributions after the application is made, but before the license is granted, are permissible. So there may be a reporting requirement for something that, if reported, would show a violation of the law. But I think we need to, and we'll have an opportunity to participate at the rulemaking stage when the Office of Campaign and Political Finance gets there to make a comment and be heard, and we'll have a chance to formulate a policy for that. But I think that we ought to take a careful look at this, have a little memorandum in front of us, and then make a judgment about that. I think the same is true of the bill that is pending in the House. The legislative session ends fairly soon, and so that may be a moot point now. It may become a moot point, but I think before we act on that one way or the other, we ought to take a look at the specific issues that raises, notwithstanding a general support of the notion of transparency being a good thing, which I think we all agree. But there are some issues in there that I think we need to take a more careful look at before we can come to a position.
Is there a big difference between any other ballot referendum spending question and those guidelines as compared to this piece?
Under this bill, the guidelines would be the same for, well, the reporting dates would be a little bit different.
Right.
But because the timeline is much shorter typically
Right.
than it is for a general referendum question. But the reporting requirements would be generally the same, and in fact, the bill takes the form of amendments to the referendum disclosure provisions that are now in the statutes.
I guess there's nothing really too much for us to talk about at the moment, but it sort of feels to me like, with rare exceptions, there's no need for us to get proactively involved, to take a position on these things. I guess if we were asked by the legislature, we could consider it more formally, but we've got enough things to do, implementing and understanding and interpreting law, which is already on the books, and we can control the transparency of our own operations. I'm much as I think this is a very interesting topic and something it's good that somebody's paying attention to. I'm not sure I think it's our job to do that. So as a general rule.
I think we can draw a distinction between the first one, which has statutory roots and which has some reporting requirements to us, as well as to the Office of Campaign and Political Finance, and the more general referendum one. And on that one, I would agree that thoughtful people can and are looking at this and will make an appropriate judgment, and we're generally in favor of disclosure of and transparency in our operations, and that's about as far as we need to go.
That seems right to me. So maybe we'll just sort of sit tight on the House bill, but if you and your new Deputy General Counsel work on teeing up a memo for us on the regs?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think I'll wait, Mr. Chairman, until we actually see the draft regulation that's
Okay.
put out for public comment.
Right,
and
so
we'll get-
totally
Right.
at your discretion.
Right.
Okay, the Compulsive Gambling Forum for the public to know on Monday, June 25th, to be reminded at North Shore Community College in Lynn from 1 to 4 or 4:30, I think. We have our fourth public forum that will be on the topic of compulsive gambling, being managed for us by the Association on Compulsive Gambling, or Compulsive Gambling Association. Much as MAPC did the community mitigation session last Monday. It's open to the public, it'll be streamed live. I think it'll be a really important, interesting topic. It's a very big issue, and this will be the first time we've really had an opportunity to get into it at any depth. I think all the logistics are clear. I think we all know what's going on, so I don't think there's anything else really to talk about there. The Compulsive Gambling Forum I mentioned today, that Commissioner Cameron is attending. She will report back to us. They were, among other things, soliciting new members. I think we decided we would not become a member of this organization, but we did want to be aware of what they were talking about, what they were doing, and show our colors there. So that's why Commissioner Cameron is there. Community outreach responses to requests for information. Is that a restating of the?
It's restating of 5C.
5C, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, right, okay, so let's scratch that. Report from the Director of Communications and Outreach, Ms. Driscoll.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
So just some basic updates. Many of you already know what's going on in the media relations world right now, but on Friday, I'm looking forward to meeting with a number of state vendors to discuss capabilities for logo creation and some support for various branding initiatives that we'll probably have coming down the pike. Monday, I'm looking forward to a meeting with webmaster for mass.gov so that we can discuss some immediate ways to make some changes to the website and add some new features that will be more reader-friendly, and as we've discussed, make it more of a portal of information, one-stop shopping for our community members that are looking for various types of information, as well as the introduction of the Speakers Bureau, which we hope to have up and running very soon. following up on a number of press inquiries from the past forums, as well as still working on promoting the problem gambling forum for Monday. We've been getting a lot of press coverage on that, so that's been good to see. I'm also working on placing notifications for upcoming race hearings. Met with Commissioner Cameron and one of the legal representatives today, just stating to, and educating me on what the needs are and requirements in terms of proper notification for race hearings. So that's something that we've been going back and forth on today. Also, Commissioner Zanaga, I'll get to you. I just had some tweaking on what we had discussed in terms of the press clipping service that I think is really important, and I have the company just working on the proposal. There was some things I needed added in that I wasn't comfortable with, that I wanted them to refine a bit more, so they've done that. And like I said, just the number of clips from across the state on what's happening. We just need a service to help us stay on top of it all, so getting reports out basically twice a day on what's happening. And just continuing outreach on social media, that's been going really well. We're seeing a lot more participation on both Twitter and Facebook. So I'm also working on putting together a tutorial just to make sure everybody's up to speed on what that is. And again, just focusing on basically what I'm calling sort of the community mailbag, just all of the questions that have been coming in from community members, and just putting some organization to how we're getting back to everybody, and how consistently we're getting the same questions, and what we might do differently when we're seeing the same question over and over again in terms of outreach, which means, like I said, if we're getting the same question from several people, the likelihood that many people have that question is very high. So just making sure we're being proactive and putting out answers to things like that. So, and then, you know, again, any assistance I can provide in terms of putting together the mitigation checklist and how that will work in terms of the need for community outreach once that's put together. And I think that my component will be significant in that in terms of getting the word out.
I think in terms of the content of that, it would be really helpful when we put it together to make sure that Elaine gets a chance to look at it before we put it up, to make sure it's intelligible to the people who aren't as deeply into this as we are, and turns out to be really helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that that's when a really efficient formatting of the website too will be critical,
Right.
because that's going to be an important spot for that type of
Right.
engagement.
A couple of things, we had a lot of talk at the Community Mitigation Forum about doing something again similar, or similar maybe to all these forums in Western Mass. And I know, I talked with Tim Brennan, who's from the Pioneer Valley, and the Springfield, a couple of Springfield city councilors, I think you did also. Should we make a decision, or shall we just do that and get the ball rolling? I think we'll be hearing from them requesting that we have a public event, maybe recapitulating a fair amount of the stuff that we've done that they haven't had a chance, Western Mass has had less access to. Is everybody kind of in agreement that we ought to do that? I mean, certainly, I think if we're asked, we don't have to gin it up, but I think Tim Brennan may well contact you, and maybe you're as good a point person on this, given Western Mass, to maybe sort of help pull that together and see what people have in mind.
Yeah,
You guys have talked about it, right?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity, with the visits Commissioner Zaniga and I made to Western Massachusetts, there's a fair amount of interest in a number of groups trying to get together to address a number of issues, as we saw from workforce training to community mitigation to the stipulation in the bill of casinos having a positive impact on tourism, that we might be able to structure a meeting out there that draws in some of the components of the educational forums, but also invites some new folks to the table.
Yeah, I think if we could find a way to invite some new folks to the table out there, that'd be great. And one of the things that I heard at our development forum, and that you all have been talking about, is the tourism piece. And there was a lot of talk at the Economic Development Forum about the amenities that, that these casinos ought to have. And some just light touching on the synergy created by the existing amenities and how to partner with those. And that, it seems to me, is something that's going to be an essential ingredient of all of the casinos, regardless of where they're situated. And giving some thought as to how to do that, and what things to take into account might be a piece of something that would be new, that would be both important for us to hear and something that would fit in with a major interest in the West. I just throw that out for
No,
some consideration.
I agree with you. I don't think it's a topic that we've necessarily touched upon, with the exception of our one meeting, but, you know, the conversation the other day at the Economic Development Forum, from, you know, regardless of the location of where you're gonna put a casino, how do you make it unique? How do you connect it to the local small business economy? How do you connect it to tourism? You know, and kind of doing some brainstorming around that, as we've been trying to encourage everybody to think a little bit outside the box, might be a helpful discussion for us to have at the forum.
Yeah, and especially as we start to think about notions like this checklist of what would go into a memorandum of understanding, some of the ideas from yesterday. If some of those ideas start to come to fruition in draft form, having that discussion with the likes of the Visitors Bureau and as to exactly what that means on the ground would be very helpful. So I'm not exactly sure that there's something very immediate, but there's certainly something prior to the bulk of issuing regulations that we should
Well, for sure, yeah.
consider.
Well, maybe I think what Commissioner McHugh is suggesting is that we could have a separate forum. We've had these forums on different topics, and this whole topic of how do you mitigate the negative impacts on entertainment venues, restaurants, and the tourism industry and small business in a region, A, and B, how do you make a positive out of it? You know, how do you create strategic relationships and cross-marketing relationships and so on and so forth? That's an area where we've not really had this kind of a brainstorming session, which would be useful to us when we get to the regulations business, but also be useful to the public to hear that conversation. So that's a little bit different from what I've heard the Western Mass folks talking about yesterday. I think yesterday they were talking about, hey, this community mitigation forum was really provocative and helpful for us. It would be good if you could redo this in Western Mass. So, well, we could do both, or we could do one or the other, but, you know, would you be willing to take the lead in sort of talking with
Sure.
folks out there and seeing if it's just a matter of being present with a new topic, then I think this is a great new topic, which we should do somewhere. But also, if there's really a substantial market for redoing what we did yesterday, particularly for those who missed it.
I think it's can be a combination.
Okay, yeah,
A
all
healthy
right.
discussion around some of those topics.
Or it could be we could do two halves, too. We could do a half day on one, and one half day was kind of a redoing of the community mitigation, which is an endless topic, and we know that.
Right.
And a second, which is a fresh new focus on the relationships with surrounding tourism industry and small businesses.
Okay. Yeah, I'm
That'd be great.
happy to take the lead and see
Okay.
if there's some other pieces. we
Great.
can bring into it.
The other thing that, I mean, I think we've begun to get a little bit of traction. We had more attendance probably at this one, not than the first one, but that was a very big deal for the first one we had. But we had good attendance yesterday. We had apparently 30 or 40 people watching it full-time online, which was, you know, a lot for us. We got a lot of press attention to it, so we're beginning to get some traction on these things, and there was a lot of feedback from people saying we really appreciate being a part of the process, which of course is part of what this is all about. And we've talked about whether there would become a time when we would want to do some general sort of hearing processes. We haven't in the past, except for yesterday, spontaneously. We haven't asked people to talk to us. We've just been inviting them to listen. Is there any place as yet for a sort of just a listening tour where we would have open forums where people could just come and talk about things in general rather than these specific topics?
Do we have an opportunity with our announced notice of proposed rulemaking? I mean, we're asking people for some rather broad thoughts about how do we make the process more, efficient and timely.
So we could have maybe 3 regional hearings on that topic. Is that what you're saying, what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Or 1 or more?
Yeah, I mean, just considering how broad the notice of proposed rulemaking and comment period is, it's pretty immediate.
Yes, it is. And that certainly would be a good topic. We'd have to make it relevant, though.
Right.
We'd have to get to it because we're going to be in the stage of regulation, in the regulation process stage pretty soon. We could, and I'm not sure there's enough time to do it between now and that stage and have it be meaningful. We could do it in the context of the public hearing on proposed regulations, but again, we're likely to be on a tight timeline there. We could also do it around the subject of what the rest of the process ought to look like once we get this preliminary process underway. And go on a listening tour with respect to the mitigation pieces and structure it so that we're looking for things that we ought to include in our final application, because that piece will be somewhere down the road and we'll have much more time to digest what we hear from those. And if we schedule those kinds of things in the early fall, we could really benefit from hearing what people have to say and structure it in a way that would help them come to the table prepared to say
Right.
Useful things, rather than just
Yeah.
to tell us what you think about.
Yeah, and my suggestion would be that that's just it. I don't think you want it too broad if you want it to be really productive. So I think that once we can sort of narrow down specifically what the call to action is for feedback, it'll be a more productive session. And the other thing is I've been getting some feedback, and I think that as we move into the hearings, this is something that we're going to be considering in terms of attendance. That there's a desire that's been expressed by some community members to have these at night, after work, maybe on a Saturday morning, but when we can increase attendance for individuals that might be at work during the course of the day. I think for the forums, it's a little bit different. We've certainly made many, we've put a lot of things in place to give everybody an opportunity to view the video, to read the transcript. We've certainly made that available to everyone, but in terms of people who would like to physically attend, I just think that for hearings, when we're asking for feedback, we should consider doing 1 or 2 of them at night or on a weekend.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Well, would you maybe talk with Commissioner McHugh and think about, there is a topic on the table right now. We've got that posted notice, and for somewhere between 30 and 60 days, input would probably still be relevant. And it's a pretty focused topic, and it's a pretty interesting topic. The earlier questions are, what do you think about, you help us draft regulations on phase 1 of the RFA? And that closing question was, any other ideas do you have on expediting the RFA process? I think that's a pretty interesting topic, and maybe the industry, who we haven't really spoken to at all so far, would have some interest in coming to the table on those issues. So if we could get it together quickly enough that it's still meaningful in terms of the regulations, I think that would be ones worth pursuing. If not, then maybe skip to these other regulatory drafting processes that Commissioner McHugh was talking about. But I think we ought to take a shot at doing one on the current thing that's out there. if you guys think we can come up, wouldn't have to be a
Okay.
series, it could just be one. And Janice, can help with the logistics and stuff. What's nice is if you can find somebody else to do it, like I've found MAPC and compulsive gambling, I didn't have to do very much. If you can find somebody else, I don't know if there's anybody who.
Well, with a listening,
Interesting.
if we're gonna do a listening thing, that's
That's a little different,
basically
yeah.
go invite everybody to
And-
come and talk about this topic.
And stand and
it's
listen, yeah,
really
right, it's true, good point.
publicity
It's
thing.
easier.
and-
Right.
and It's really not much organization except finding some
Venue.
quiet place, and
Yeah.
maybe we could do it outdoors or something.
Yeah, right, right.
We do have this window of
Tango.
time
There
where we
you
can do
are.
it outdoors.
Yeah, we're gonna do it Tango. But yours, you might be able to find an organization that, the Western Mass process that you were talking about. We'll talk about that. All right, well, I think that'd be great if we could do that. Thank you very much. Thank you. The discussion of the June 14th Economic Development Forum that we didn't have a chance to talk about right after the meeting. Commissioner McHugh, I think, talked a little bit about one of the things, the two things that struck me, well, the three things. One we talked about quite a bit, which is there's no reason to think from the people that we have consulted that there's any reason to rethink the basic assumptions of, 3+1. That was clearly the strongest message, and the job generation, the revenue generation, the gross gaming revenue projections. Nobody seems to think that there's no reason for us to think that those don't hold water at this stage of the game. That clearly was a major conclusion. The two other things that I took away from that, and I thought we ought to talk about a little bit, whatever other takeaways there might have been, were, one, the criticality of making these destination resorts, and having the kinds of amenities that are going to pull people from outside the small region, the 60-minute region. And I don't exactly know, I assume the industry will take it upon themselves to do this, and they know who they're trying to attract, I assume, but it certainly was a suggestion to us that we be attentive to trying to encourage amenities to the maximum extent possible in order that we expand our reach as much as possible, because the dollar that you bring in from another state is the highest value dollar. So that was one interesting thing that I think was useful. The second one was there clearly were some issues raised about the slots parlor. I think maybe all four of the experts, but certainly at least three of them talked about. One of them said that a slots parlor was not in their projections, flat out. One of them said it's the major kind of a facility that has a pure substitution effect, where you're simply recycling dollars that might otherwise have gone someplace else. There's very little new money, or much less new money in a slots parlor. And there was quite a bit of discussion about the location, some pro, some con. It wasn't quite definitive. One person, I think, suggested that it might devalue a casino license if you had a slots parlor nearby. Another person, I think, said there might be an agglomeration effect, where getting more than one to close by might have a positive effect. But I think it certainly raised or emphasized some issues about the slots parlor. So, two things. One, any other thoughts on those two issues about how we might follow up? And two, any other takeaways or topics of discussion from that meeting?
Another takeaway I had, I think those topics were important, but another takeaway I had was from the discussion of the Missouri competitive citing process, the only competitive citing process that we've really looked at closely. And their report and the presentation by Mr. Remedi, I thought was very valuable, and particularly valuable was the design of a competitive process by first deciding the factors on which you wanted competition, and then designing an application form that would allow you to have metrics that matched, so you could make fair judgments about the competitive and relative value of the proposals you were getting. That whole process of how to decide, and I know it's a long ways down the road, because that gets to the substance, not the preliminary qualifications. But it's worth thinking about, I thought it was worth thinking about as we move forward, what those benchmarks are gonna be. What are we, and it really gets to the heart of what the bill is designed to do. Job creation, mitigation, and those kinds of things. But we need to think about it so that we can design an application that's capable of meaningful, applications that are capable of meaningful comparison. And I thought that was a very helpful discussion that we had from him.
And that we have the capacity to double-check those assertions, you know.
Yes,
those-
yeah, sure.
Right.
And the rigor with which they went through in Missouri, the figures they were getting from the applicants,
Right.
and the way they compared in each case of one to the other in their evaluation process
Right.
was something that I thought was a real model for our approach to this process.
Any other thoughts or reactions?
No, just a couple of points that have already been mentioned about, you know, the uniqueness of the facility to make it, you know, truly a destination where we're gonna be able to draw in, obviously, that out-of-state money, and I think that's where it becomes so much more important to the connection to the tourism piece. But just looking, I made a lot of notes about, you know, the slots parlor location. Somebody in the first panel had suggested locating a slots parlor close to where the money goes out
Right.
of your region.
Right.
As well as, you know, is keeping it as far away from the destination casinos as possible. Is
Right.
another suggestion by the gentleman who had done the Boston study. And getting back to what Michael Pollack from Spectrum talked about, which is another issue that we're mindful of, which is the impact on lottery receipts. And the suggestion being, if it's well thought out enough in advance, the relationship between the casinos and the lottery, that we can minimize some of what would be, you know, well-perceived losses or revenue shortfalls or downturn for the lottery as the casinos open their doors. So being that forward-thinking, I think, was a healthy discussion. Plus, I picked up a lot of good things, you know, relative to the research piece that we keep talking about
Yeah, I did too.
and weighing in terms of, you know, local factors to assess, relationships with the casinos in terms of per capita income, you know, even some people saying, you know, I think the comment was made a couple of times in terms of lack of good research that's been done. I think that comes back to our point of having the chance to do some good baseline research before these actually open. But
And
looking
we're-
at the
and we're-
number.
And we're meeting with some folks to talk about that idea tomorrow, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And looking at something as simple as, you know, business licenses, you know, number of businesses that were starting prior to a casino, number of small businesses, those licenses may still be valid or not valid. I mean, that's really drilling down into the minutia. And probably some of that detail work we're obviously not gonna know until we actually approve a license for a particular jurisdiction.
Yeah, there were very good takeaways I was going to mention on that relative to the research that we could commission as part of this baseline study, and data that we could start aggregating relative to property values, the inventory of
Yeah,
businesses
right.
prior to,
Right.
so that years down the line, we could look back and say, this is the net effect.
Right.
Because there's this many more or less, or this difference in the types of businesses, in the employment at the local level or regional level.
Right.
I think those were very
Yeah.
takeaways.
I continue to be really excited about, this is item 9, but this whole research idea, I don't know how big it is, how expensive. I think we really have an opportunity to do a credible public service with a real serious long-term study of what the impacts of these things are. I asked the question of somebody about the sequencing, is it a good idea to maybe, somebody had suggested the possibility of picking one set first, one casino first, one site first, in order that losers could rebid, and nobody had any experience with that, but Rachel Volberg, who attends all of our meetings, who's a very sophisticated researcher in all this stuff, sent me an email and said she knows of one, which she always does, and New Zealand, I haven't studied it yet, but apparently New Zealand has used this as a strategy. So that's something I'll try to follow up on. That was another takeaway that I forgot to mention. I wonder whether the slots issue is going to be on us relatively soon. If we get out our RFA 1, which pre-qualifies slots operators as well, proposers as well as the casino operators, it's probably a much less time-sensitive process, because as far as we know so far, it's relatively small operators that we know about, at least, that are going to be proposing. And so we could be turning around, and we have to get that phase 2 RFA out in advance of the phase of the casino, or at least some way or other we have to move quicker in order to comply with the law. I wonder whether it would be worth talking with the consultants next week about whether there's a way to get more information about how the impacts of slots, the cost-benefit analyses of slots, the locationing of slots, et cetera. Does that seem like something that would be a worthwhile topic? It seems to me there's a lot we don't know yet, and I don't know where exactly you go to learn it, but I would assume that our two consultant folks would know as much about this as anybody in the consultant world. Does that make sense?
I think it does make sense. My only concern about next week is that I don't want to dilute their efforts from what already is a really tight time. They are just, behind the scenes, they're churning out a lot of stuff that's going to get laid on our table over the next 6 weeks. And we will have a little time. I don't mean to suggest that it's not going to come on us, but perhaps at a time when the ball's on our court and we're wading our way through what they've given us, they can turn their attention.
Well, I wasn't thinking of asking them to do any more work on it at the moment.
Right.
I was just thinking of asking them, how do you, just talk about it with them, just that they could do off the tops of their heads. If it turns out there is more work, which there might be, and that maybe we would want them to do it, then I would agree with you completely. This is timely, but not as timely as a lot of the other things they're working on. So we might give them a heads up that we'll at least just ask them about this, but not to do any work on it. The other thing that occurred to me about this, about the amenities and the destination resort issue is there anything that we can do or the state can do to work with the operators, the casino operators, to encourage out-of-state people? I mean, is there something we could do with Massport to encourage collaborations or promotions or advertising and or, I mean, if we had an entry tax, which we don't, we could talk about maybe lifting entry taxes for people from, but I'm thinking about things like that. Are there ways that we could work with the facilities to encourage particularly out-of-state, international and out-of-state audience? It's a big deal for us if we can, and I'm going to have this meeting I talked about with the tourism partnership, and I talked with Jim Rooney from the convention center, and we'll do more of that. Maybe we just brainstorm and ask people, but it's something to really think about. If we could think of anything different about to give them tools, or maybe we give them incentives or something. I don't know. Maybe there's an incentive structure that by attracting out of state such and such, they get such and such. I don't know.
I mean, at a bare level, you talk about marketing opportunities. I mean, now I understand there are direct flights from Tokyo to Boston, which,
Right.
Big in-migration of people who might be predisposed to want to go to a casino. Certainly that helps in the Boston area, and that's probably a competitive advantage that we have over the rest of the Northeast. But, again, kind of you know, putting a little bit back on, you know, either us or the developers to, again, get them to kind of keep conceptualizing about how they can be successful and thinking outside the box.
Yeah, I think that's not the only factor, but I think that is an important ingredient of making that work, making it clear in the application process and in our evaluation process that is a factor that we're looking for. We're looking for a real, not only a destination facility that's capable of keeping people happy for a week, but also a plan that's designed to get people from outside of Massachusetts and indeed outside the country. And what are you gonna do in that regard?
Right.
And making that a part of the competitive process and figuring out
Yep.
some metric to measure the relative strength of the proposals in that area as well as in some of the others.
Right.
I mean, it ties back into the workforce development
Right.
piece of the applicant. What are you doing relative to your workforce? I mean, I'm gonna be encouraged by somebody who's done a lot of that strategic thinking and thinking about partnerships and alliances.
Right.
When they get to that step.
Yeah. Well, this will be the interesting part of our jobs. Eventually, we
Right.
start really thinking about this, but the two sides of it, one is incentivizing the bidders to think as aggressively and as creatively as possible, because that will be one of our important criteria, but also thinking about how we can encourage them, what we can give them back, you know, because it costs money to market overseas. So on both sides of that equation, I'm sure we can think of stuff to do, but that'll be interesting. Anything else from the follow-up on the economic forum? Discussion of the June 18 mitigation forum, yesterday's mitigation forum, I think we pretty well chewed that one over. What are we doing with the questions that came in? There were some.
I gave them to Brandon to put in the chart that we've started, and just as similar to what we're doing with the other questions that come in through email.
Okay.
And we'll answer them back probably by the end of the week.
Okay, good. So everybody will hear back from us.
Yes.
Great.
There were some great takeaways and some good points that the woman from Nevada was very clear in terms of, you know, if you're a community asking a developer for some mitigation funds, make sure it is monies that are directly related to the mitigation. Don't try to
Yeah.
cover everything else under the sun. You know, really express your point that this is a mitigation cost and we need to deal with it, as
Right.
opposed to we're gonna cherry pick and help fund some things where we have a revenue shortfall.
Right, well, and which was a good point to me, because I'm always talking about trying to get them to think, you know, what else can we leverage with your money? And that's interesting, but, you know, that was sort of contrary to her point, which was good advice, you know, don't take your eye off the ball too far. Okay, anything else on yesterday? Speaking engagements, I spoke this morning at the Greater Taunton Area Chamber of Commerce, which was interesting, really a hotbed. I had to drive by Raynham Taunton to get there, by the former track. And it was a little bit difficult because they're all interested in the tribal gaming, and of course, we don't know anything about the tribal gaming. That's going to be managed not by us, but by the compact, or by us to the extent that the compact gives us authority, and we don't know yet. But that was interesting. Are there any other ones coming up?
I have my rescheduled visit with the folks from the tourism bureaus. That was supposed to be originally the Friday before Memorial Day weekend.
Oh.
It's next week.
Right, okay. Great. I can't think of anything else that, I don't think there's anything else. Okay, research agenda, we talked about a little bit. I heard the same things you did, and there's been a big proposal I think has been circulated, that was sent to us by this research team from UMass Amherst, and those folks are coming in to talk to us. And Commissioner Stebbins and I are gonna try to brainstorm on this some more, and maybe tee up an idea of how we can take the legislative mandate to do a baseline study of the socioeconomic impacts of gaming, and maybe expand it up to something a little bigger maybe than even was envisioned. So we'll work on that and be back to you. Anything else, other business, any other topics? All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, folks.